name is Fiammetta Rocco. I'm the books and arts editor at The Economist. And with me today is David Jaffe, art historian, curator, Old Master expert. We're sitting outside the National Gallery in London, where the most magnificent exhibition of Italian painter Veronese has just opened. David, nice to have you with us. Now, 16th century Italy, you've got Titian, you've got Tintoretto. Where does Veronese fit in?
Well, he's the great ghost behind them because he never really got the publicity of the others. No one could take on Titian. Titian was the name, and Veronese sadly only got 12 years of painting after Titian's death. And he devoted all that to sort of doing homages to Titian. But he stands out in seeing him from a distance. He's the most beautiful colourist. He's a better colourist than Titian. Titian's more emotion, Tintoretto's more storm and drum, but Veronese can make it fireworks with colour.
He painted a lot of stories, some from the Bible, some from antiquity. What can you tell from the stories that he chose?
I think a lot of the stories would have been predetermined. I mean, you know, he was ordered to do this one or that one, but when he does stories, he always gives them a very light, kind of humorous effect. There's one great one, which is in fact, you think it's secular, but it's not. It's the Temptation of St. Anthony. There's this rather beautiful girl who's having a little bit of costume failure, and she's leaning over this guy with bubble wrap back, and you think he can't be taking this too seriously. And in fact, you know, it was done for Ercole Gonzaga, Bishop Cardinal of Mantua. And it's amazing when he gets away with it. And then he does another one we've got, the National Gallery one I think is one of the best, The Good Union. And again, you've got, you know, a man and wife, obviously in love. He's holding up the piece of laurel branch or olive branch in this case. But, you know, the woman handing it out, she's got a chastity belt on, which she shouldn't have unless you're Venus, you know. It's the ultimate wonder bra. It gets every man in. And there's a dog looking up, very interested to see whether she's waxed or not. You know, it's the kind of mischief that you always get in Veronese. I think because he started off as a palace decorator for private patrons, he always had this humour.
So what can you tell about how he put together a painting?
Well, we can see it even in paintings like The Wife of Darius. You can just see this wild scribble where some of the figures haven't quite been mapped out. And he did it in a kind of frenzy of lines. And he's very unusual, but there's lots of spiky lines, there's lots of retakes. You know, another painting I love is the final Christ in the Agony Garden. He's tried the body that way, he's tried the body this way, and there's kind of this speed of frenzy. And you get this idea that he's never quite settled on how he wants the painting to look until the last minute. And then he does this wonderful alchemy of colour to tie it all together. You know, the colours sort of flick backwards and forwards.
You talk about his talent for colour, and one of the things that really hits you going around the show particularly is this blue.
Yeah.
What was his trick with blue?
Well, blue, the most expensive blue, lapis lazuli, came from Afghanistan. They were always shooting at people who tried to pick it up, so it's still expensive colour today. And he tried to make the painting look as if it had that blue by alchemy. He would just use little dashes of it in exactly the right points, and always so use complementary colours, so you get these kind of mauves coming out with blues and purples and reds, and they shimmer in front of you. And this ether of colour somehow suffuses the whole painting. You think it's blue, it very rarely is. I think Bridget Riley and John Golding had this huge discussion on Veronese blue, the blue you can't see.
Floating mauve, that's another phrase that one hears about Veronese. What exactly does that mean?
Well, it's just a property of that colour that it seems to absolutely make a haze in front of a painting. And the only easy way of thinking about it, go into Monet's Water Lilies, who's the next artist who really got it. And you get this same suffusion of colour. You're not sure if it's in front of you or in the picture plane, and it kind of unites the whole painting surface. It's a very visual effect. And you've got to see it in paintings in the daylight. The great thing about this exhibition is you get the daylight which lets the colours float.
One of your favourite paintings, you've already mentioned, The Agony in the Garden, is actually quite a small picture. What is it about this picture that really grips you?
I think it's partly the idea that he's confronting death, and he's, you know, Christ, we actually know he's dripping blood, according to the Bible at this point, in sweat. But it's this iridescent light that comes down and lifts him out, even though he's slumped. And the angel goes from kind of this wonderful kind of sparkling blue to mauves, and her drapery looks like it's almost molten in the light. And I mean, all of us always think light can transform us to another world. In this case, he really pulls it off. I don't think you can point to another painting where you get this sense of boiling colour so beautifully achieved. And the rest of the painting is quite dark, so it's all about making the light bring the image out. And it's the intensity of it. He's not often that serious. He's much more a natural decorator, but you actually think he's trying to say, this is salvation, this light is the salvation. It's Stonehenge, really. It's all about catching the light at dawn.
Now, there are a lot of pictures here that are very big, very grand, very classical. Where do you see Veronese's genius as a painter?
Well, his genius was creating these rhythms, these kind of harmonies, these tunes that you can't get out of your head, the visual tunes of colour, which the next generations took on. I mean, Tieppo couldn't have existed without Veronese. This great tradition of 18th century decorative painting, it didn't come from Titian, it didn't come from Tintoretto, it came from Veronese, and this kind of light Rococo touch is probably his great contribution. I mean, the other contribution is much more subtle. He understood that painting was theatre. You know, he'd have someone shoot an arrow across the nave of a church to hit someone on the other side. He'd use the whole space. And in that sense, he was a great theatrical designer and choreographer of space. And I think that's where his lasting influence is probably almost in performance art now. He makes, every older piece looks like some kind of performance, and it has a happy ending.
David, thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was David Jaffe talking to me about the wonderful new show of Veronese that's just opened at the National Gallery.
The Economist.